All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for being here today. I'm Sarah. I'm an associate with Environment Colorado. Environment Colorado works for clean air, clean water, clean energy, wildlife, and open spaces. And we're so excited that you guys are here today to talk with us about bee-friendly plants in Colorado with some awesome panelists, and it's going to be a great conversation. So throughout the webinar, we'll have a way for you to ask questions. Feel free to ask them in the Zoom chat, and then we'll get to them after our panelists speak. And then also this webinar will be recorded, so we'll post it on our website if you want to go back and watch it later or send to anyone, or if you have any additional questions, you can follow up. So the main reason why we're here today is that bees are extremely important, and we should all be planting things that support them in Colorado. They are crucial to our food systems. Bees are actually responsible for 1 in every 3 bites of food we eat. And this includes apples, almonds, avocados, blueberries, potatoes, pumpkins, tomatoes, lots of different foods. And they're also famous for pollinating different Colorado products like Palisade peaches and Rocky Ford melons. And in addition to this, Colorado is the state with the 5th greatest diversity of different bee populations, about 946 native bee species. So it is extremely important to protect our pollinators. Unfortunately, studies have found the western bumblebee has declined about 72% in different parts of Colorado. And right now, these bee populations are shrinking because of different factors like pesticides, climate change, habitat destruction. So backyard gardens are actually extremely important in the effort to save these bees, and planting pesticide-free plants can help to save their populations. We're really excited that you all are here and willing to talk about this one simple thing that we can all do, which is choosing beneficial plants for your gardens. And the first part of our panel today will be about different flowers you can plant in your gardens. And then I'll talk about some recent policy actions protecting bees in Colorado. So up we have Brad and Caitlin, if either one of you want to go first.
Up to you, Caitlin. Do you want to go first? You want me to? Oop, you're still muted too.
Thank you. I was going to say, I don't care. You can go first.
Awesome. Cool. I'll go first then. Welcome everyone and good morning. My name is Brad Kuhn. I'm the owner of Finding Nectar Nursery here in Arvada, Colorado. We are a pollinator-friendly educational nursery. We do a lot of classes at our nursery for schools, and even a few for adults in there. All of our plants are good for local pollinator species. And we're always just excited to share more information about our pollinators. As we always talk about how much diversity of pollinators there are in Colorado, specifically with bees. The biggest question we always get is how do you help? And that comes down to habitat in there. One of the bigger ones that we kind of talk about, which is not technically a bee, I know we're talking about bees in here, is the milkweed, which most people kind of know is the host plant for monarch butterflies. The Gamble oak is the one for our actual state butterfly, the hair streak in there. But then it's always good to be looking at the other plant species. We got to look at for our leaf cutter bees and our roses, our soft leaf type plants. We have our goldenrods and our currants and things like that are also native to Colorado that really help out there too. And one of our big important things that we watch out for at our nursery is just we don't use any pesticides at our nursery. We try to use beneficials in other ways to mitigate that risk. So yeah, if you guys have questions, fire away later on, and I'm happy to answer them there. So yeah, Caitlin, if you want to take it away.
All right, sounds good. My name is Caitlin McDonough. I'm owner and general manager of SoCo Organics, located in Pueblo, Colorado. What's really important to me in regards to bees, and kind of one thing that I try to encourage and teach to our local community is companion planting. attracting bees to your garden on top of planting things that are going to be beneficial to the bees. A lot of the benefits of planting your vegetable gardens in terms of bees is with bees pollinating your vegetables, you're going to have more vigorous and better developed fruits. And in the same way that bees need plants to survive, plants actually need bees to survive. A lot of your food, like Sarah mentioned, it needs to be pollinated. So for us, one thing I really like to encourage is instead of just having your basic like tomatoes and peppers, but you want to companion plant flowers and herbs on top of that. So some of my favorite plants to have in the garden, especially are herbs. From my understanding, there's research that suggests bees see purples, violets, and blue hues the best. So if you can get purple flowers into your garden, purple and blue, and some of the herbs that I think best do that would be like hyssop, lavender, chives, basil, purple basil. There are other blue borage is a great one, and these are all herbs that you're growing for yourself, but then you're also growing for your bees. On top of those, I like to have the lemon balm, mint especially. I find I don't usually cut the flowers off of my mint. I let it flower and continue to flower so that the bees do have a source of food. Catmint, sage, thyme, oregano, and dill. These are all great herbs. They attract bees to your garden, and then the bees, as they're eating from your herbs, then they'll go on to your vegetables. Some of the vegetables that are necessary to have bees and other pollinators visit them, like cucumbers, zucchinis, pumpkins, pretty much all your squash varieties. Beans, eggplants, lettuce, carrots, if you're letting your carrots go to seed. Tomatoes are interesting. They are a self-pollinating plant. However, like I mentioned before, if you do have bees pollinating and other pollinators helping pollinate your fruits, they're going to be more prolific. And then some of the fruits that I like to recommend people grow would be like berries, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, in your trees, apples, peaches, plums, cherries, grapes, watermelon, cantaloupe. And those are all just, pretty much anything you can plant. But for me, I think it's really important that when you are planting a vegetable garden or an edible garden, that you are attracting bees to your garden. I have a lot of customers come in and tell me, oh, my garden didn't do so well. And a lot of the times it comes down to, well, what all did you plant and how are you attracting your pollinators? Because the wind can help and certain environmental things can help, but really it's the pollinators that are going to make it successful or not.
Sarah, you're still muted.
Thank you guys. That was great. Brad, do you have any favorite plants to add to that list?
Oh, we have, one of my favorites is anything that smells super fragrant for, if we're talking about companion plants and things like that. All the Agastaches are some of my favorites in there. Also love the smell of it. You get that anise flavor throughout your garden in there. I'm a big fan of any of the tick seeds and the coreopsises in there that are hardy enough in our Colorado weather to come back year after year. I just kind of adding on is like Caitlin really did hit home that companion planting and how important it is for open pollinator type plants in your garden to have those companion plants. Even if it's just the marigolds around there to help with the other beneficial insects, just to keep our bees healthy and safe that way too. You know, that's another important thing to keep in mind when you're planting is not only, you know, planting just for the bees, but planting for that diversity in your gardens too, because, you know, trying to go after one specific thing, one specific species of pollinator isn't always the best because year round there's different pollinators that are coming through. So.
Great, thank you. So that was a lot of great information. I'm sure there's lots of questions. We will get to those questions in a second. First, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some recent policy wins for bees in Colorado. So earlier I mentioned neonics, which are a pesticide that are extremely dangerous to bees. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about those, why we don't want them in our plants, and then talk about the recent policy wins. So neonics are actually 1,000 times more toxic to bees than DDT. And even small doses of them can cause immune deficiencies and disorientation. So it's really hard for bees to forage, fly, do all the necessary functions that they're used to doing, including pollinating. But there is some good news. This July, a bill is going into effect that will remove neonics from retail stores, which is where most of us buy our plants. And after this bill goes into effect, only licensed pesticide dealers will be able to sell neonics. So this is a great win because we've learned that actually a lot less bees live in huge agricultural areas because monocultures aren't exactly ideal for pollinators. So urban areas like your backyards are really prime spots for pollinators like bees to live. And this new bill is really great just because so many people are putting dangerous chemicals like neonics into their gardens without actually knowing how bad they are for local pollinators. And especially in urban areas like your gardens, which plants we choose have a huge impact on the populations of pollinators in Colorado. So hopefully the great information today can help you in choosing plants for your gardens this spring. And on that note, do we have any questions for our panelists? We can also.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So one question that came up was difficulty propagating milkweed. Are there any foolproof tips for ensuring seeds sprout?
Cold stratification, and I can kind of answer that one since we deal a lot, we grow everything kind of with seed in there. Our best way with propagating our milkweed is we actually propagate them typically in our fridge, basically on just a cool sheet of cloth on there. The cold stratification really helps out our milkweed seeds in that way. You know, just getting them a little bit of damp, and then once they actually sprout, being able to plug them into your pots is the best way that we know to be able to propagate them. If you're going out there and collecting them from seed pods, our germination rate that like we get is a little bit lower than buying from a local milkweed seed supplier in there. I don't know why I'm struggling with that. But the cold stratification really helps out with the milkweed seeds that we find in there. And that's the best little tip that when people ask us about how to grow their milkweed at home, that we do. So putting them in the fridge, if you don't have the ability to like keep them damp and cool in your fridge, you know, just putting them in your fridge beforehand for a couple weeks and give them that false sense that winter is kind of coming to the end is the best way.
Another question that's coming in from the chat here is around specialist pollinators. Can either of you talk about specialist pollinators, a class of bees that only use Solidago, which blooms in late summer and fall, and what do they do the rest of the time? Any information on that?
I guess is the question more Solidago, goldenrod? It blooms in the fall. And I'm assuming that that's kind of where that question is coming from in there. And I mean, there's other. It's kind of a broad question, and I don't want to, if that person could add a little more detail in there, or maybe maybe I could scroll up and find it in there in those questions. A lot of the pollinators that use one specific plant have adapted to, coming out of hibernation a little bit later, have adapted to like having different times of years that like they're kind of going through. They kind of have like more of a migratory type of mentality to them. So like their anatomy, their physiology is actually causing them to be able to wait until later in that summer to be able to use the nectars from that class of bee in there. I'm not really doing a great job answering this question because it's a little broad in there. So if that person could add a little more to that question, I might be able to answer that a little bit better. If you want to email me, I can get you a little bit more of a specific answer in there to be able to answer that better.
I guess one way to answer this would be, are there other plants to plant in addition to Solidago that bloom at different parts of the year so that you have sort of a running supply of food, so to speak?
Yeah, and that is something that we actually talk about all the time at our nursery, is really planting. And Caitlin really hit this home with like her companion planting, is even in like your non-vegetable gardens, planting for your blooms to be blooming at all times of the year is really important for our pollinator species. Like when we here in Colorado, have this like warmer winter and we don't really have as much food source coming out quite yet. The bees that are actually coming out of their, winter hibernation looking for, some little bits of nectar in there is really important. So planting, your early springs, planting your blue flaxes, your spiderworts, your things like that, even your columbines that like can bloom a little earlier in the spring, and give them and provide them a little bit of food source in that aspect, so that they can kind of get by, is really important when you're looking at that, not even just for the that specific class of bee, but like you're also then attracting other things that like help out and help your garden kind of get up and going too.
And then one thing to add that it's not necessarily planting plants, but one thing that I know as a backyard beekeeper is you can supplement bees with their lack of nectar in the winter and the early spring with giving them sugar water. So you can put out hummingbird feeders or other feeders that have sugar water, and that'll help those bees or specific species of bees to find a food source. And that's just coming from a background of being a backyard beekeeper, not necessarily a background of planting plants.
I'm seeing a couple questions looking for tips on plants that do well in pots if somebody doesn't have good garden space in the ground, and then also any tips on plants that would do better above at higher elevation, maybe 8,500 feet or higher.
Just to jump in real fast, one thing that I've found is there are certain seed companies, like we have a seed company called Renee's Garden, and they actually have an entire line of vegetables, flowers, and herbs that have been specifically bred to be container varieties. So you can look for seeds that would be container specific. We have things like beans and peas and let's see, peppers. I have tomatoes, sunflowers, nasturtiums. So there are a lot of options in terms of fruits, veggies, and flowers that are good for containers. but then pretty much all your herbs can grow really well in containers. So I would look for things like herbs, mints, basil, thyme, oregano, all of that will grow really well in containers.
And there's also a lot of like native perennial species that stay significantly smaller. In there, we grow everything that we grow on there in pots. We just grow them in very large pots in there that really kind of helps out in there too, because like as a lot of us know, like digging in our soil sucks. I mean, like we have a lot of clay here in the Front Range, and using pots for planting and attracting pollinators, even in like downtown Denver. There's approximately just 150 bee species in downtown Denver, and then you look around there, there's really not any open space to have gardens and things like that. So like you are planting for pollinators when you do plant your planter boxes, you do plant your outdoor pots and things like that. And there's really not like a simple like go out and buy some of these herbs. There's really not like a list of perennials that like you could. It's all going to be dictated by like what size of pot you're actually using. And again, I'm wide open, and I'm sure Caitlin is too, to like if you have a specific question or a pot or things like that, like I am happy to give examples or shoot out a couple ideas of if you want herbs and all of that, because there's so many, and there's just a wide range of plants that you could pick. And maybe you want something fragrant by your front door. That's a question that I got a lot last year, weirdly. And they want like a lavender plant in a pot. And so we talked about like the best ways like they could successfully have a lavender in a pot by their front door. So we get a wide range of these types of questions throughout the year. And there's no set answer of like what you can do and what you can't do. Gardening is, an ebb and a flow of like what's going to work for you based on what light, what altitude. And, for that high elevation of like planting above like 8,500 feet, your list of plants that you're going to have is significantly lower. You look at like the columbines and again, the spiderworts. I'm really just thinking of spring plants since it's almost spring right here. For some reason that's on my mind. But there's some hardy sages that would do well. There's some globe mallows. There's a lot of other things that like we could try for you up there. So we can, after this, I can kind of write up a list of like some of your common ones for planting at a high altitude and send those over for Sarah to kind of post along with this, or we could add a slide or something like that on there. But that is a good question, since we are in the mountains, is like what can be planted up there. And then after this, I'll get a list over to Sarah probably in the next day or two to be able to post that, to have that specific list out there for you to kind of choose from.
Yeah, and just a reminder, this will also be recorded, so lots of good info if you want to go back and watch. There was a question earlier about neonics. Why are they existing? How do we know that they're harming bees, but they're still being used? I just wanted to touch on there is progress being made. This recent bill passed was a really huge win, just because people like us who are buying plants who don't know that they're neonics in them, that's a really big part of the problem. And backyard gardens, like I was talking about, are really where pollinators are thriving, as opposed to like these other stores that can sell neonics that are licensed to. So yeah, just wanted to touch on a lot of progress is being made. It's really exciting. It's one of the reasons we're talking today. But yeah, so I thought that was an interesting question. And then someone asked, is the ratio for bee sugar water the same as hummingbird water? If one of y'all want to answer that.
So when I make my bee sugar water, it's just a 1-to-1 sugar to water. I think hummingbird is less. I could be wrong, but yeah, with making a sugar water, I just do a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah. Hummingbird is 4-to-1. I believe in there, and try not to use your dyes in your hummingbird water. Let the hummingbird feeder itself attract in your hummingbirds in general in there. But yeah, 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 for like outdoor open air bee feeding in the spring is good. If you're trying to feed them in the fall, definitely use the 1-to-1 type of ratio to give the bees their carbohydrates. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. 1 second.
We're getting a couple questions just around how do you identify or know bad pesticides. I think that's something we may need to get back in touch with folks after this to have a list, but there is a question, what are alternatives to pesticides? So I guess if Brad or Caitlin, if you could talk a little bit about why do stores use pesticides to begin with, and what would be alternatives that either they could use or that you all use. Caitlin, I see you came off mute. Do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times people use pesticides because they're easy. It's kind of like a one and done type application. But there's a lot to pesticides besides just harming your bees. Pesticides are gonna damage your soil biology, the microbial life in your soil. They could damage your plants. There's a lot more to the bad sides of pesticides. And I think a lot of times people just think about, I just want the quickest, easiest option. One thing that we like to promote here in the store is the use of beneficial bugs. I believe that was already mentioned before, but there are so many different, when you think about the bug world, there's so many options in terms of dealing with bugs. So things like ladybugs, lacewings, praying mantids, those are all great for like your foliage of your plants. Things like earthworms and nematodes, those are great for the soil biology, for reducing you can attack things like grubs, other pathogens, other types of insects just through the use of those beneficial bugs. And then the other thing that we like to utilize is more natural things. So understanding things like sulfur is a great example. Sulfur is a very beneficial nutrient to a plant. But on the flip side, when you're dealing with things like spider mites or powdery mildew, sulfur is really toxic. So using products like sulfur or molasses. Molasses is really good as a spray for things like aphid or other small or soft-bodied insects because, again, it's beneficial to your plant, but it's harmful to the bug. So I like to try to find more natural ways, things that are going to actually help your plant, but at the same time, kind of address your bug or maybe it's a mold or a mite, those types of issues. And then it's really important to look for things with like the OMRI listing, the CDFA listing, just looking for things that are going to say organic gardening, staying away from just like something like an Eagle 20, staying away from those more harsh chemicals and looking for more natural approaches. Other ways that I like to deal with bugs is beneficial planting or companion planting. When you look at a lot of essential oils, those can be used to deal with mites and bugs and mold. So doing things like planting rosemary and planting lavender, all these things, mint, what are some other ones that I've seen? Using things like cinnamon. There's a lot of really great approaches to dealing with all of the bad things of gardening with the good things of gardening. So we like to take more of an organic approach and recommending things like essential oils or beneficial bugs or just plant nutrients, changing the way that you feed your plant so your plant can naturally build up a good immune system essentially so that it can defend itself against bug attacks.
Brad,
Yeah.
anything to add?
Caitlin nailed that on the head. And the biggest thing that like I talk to a lot of people about and talk to our customers about too is that like if your plants are not getting eaten by something, it's not a part of the local I can't think of the word for it, but you know, it to some degree your gardens are going to get bugs and things are going to happen in there. And that does not make you a bad gardener. That does not make you anything. That just makes your plants a part of this environment. So, you know, looking at that and, you know, as Caitlin says, like taking the more organic and, you know, approach to it of like companion planting, getting your marigolds in to attract more ladybugs. You know, things like that take time, and being patient with your garden is one of those things that like we all kind of have to remember, is that like it'll all hopefully balance out in the end, you know, if you're doing the right things and thinking through you know what type of beneficials you may need because of you know, you may be getting aphids potentially this year in your garden, you know, so then it's like, okay, how do I get more ladybugs in here, or you know, thinking through it. And you know, a lot of us have had experience with infestations in our plants and things like that. And there are ways to forwardly think through it rather than just thinking through, okay, I want to plant my tomatoes in this corner and my cucumbers in this garden and that. It's like thinking through where and how those plants are going to be throughout the garden is really an important part of your veggie garden. You know, every year is, how do I not just rotate through what plants are planted where each year, but then what companion plants are planted where, and how you're attracting those beneficial insects to come help you take care of that.
I think too, another thing to consider is with those companion plants, I like to think of them as bait plants too. I'll plant certain things in the garden just for the aphids so that they'll leave my tomatoes alone, but maybe they'll go after the marigolds. Or I always see them on my herbs, and that's okay. But kind of overplanting can help deal with that in a way, because you're going to be giving the bad bugs, you know, their things to eat, and then hopefully they'll leave alone the plants that you don't want them to eat.
Just a few more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Someone asked about climate change affecting bee populations. Have either of you kind of noticed throughout the years gardening if there's been a change with your plants, maybe with different pests becoming more frequent, anything like that?
For sure. I mean, you look at we're on a bee webinar, and you know, when working with like PPAN, Pollinator Protection Network, Action Network, like their study this year says that we have 1,006 bee species in Colorado. And if bees are migrating from different states and different areas of the country and coming to Colorado, you know, we're getting less snow in the Front Range and things like that, then climate change is affecting where they can live, how they can live. You know, it's affecting what plants we can grow in the Front Range. And I'm specifically only speaking to the Front Range in there. I'll let Caitlin talk to her part of the state too, is that, you know, the amount of rainfall that we have, you know, we're high arid and we're getting less precipitation per year than we did 50 years ago in there. So the habitat's changing, and for 95% of the bees in this area, the habitat is the part that they need. So if the habitat's changing, then because of the weather and because of the rainfall and things like that, that is definitely an effect that we will see, continue to change in the future. It'll continue to change with, hummingbirds, butterflies, bats, all of that. And it's just something that we need to be aware of. And, we can, as much as I love Colorado native plants and really only having Colorado native plants in my own yard, looking to outside states to help facilitate habitat for other pollinator species for, the things that they may be short of now in our area is going to be very important.
Yeah, I would say there's not much difference down in southern Colorado. I think there has been climate change could be one issue. I think another issue is the use of pesticides, taking kind of that lazy approach to dealing with pests and problems. I think too, supporting like your local bee groups. Like, for example, down here in Pueblo, we have a bee community where it helps encourage and facilitate backyard beekeepers. If you can't keep a bee hive yourself, just maybe getting in touch with your local backyard bee community, because there's a lot that we can do to help others help facilitate bees, besides just planting gardens and planting beneficial plants. But it's also just the practices that we're applying. I think things like killing your dandelions. Dandelions are a huge food source for bees. So just kind of changing our mentality of what is like manicured and, maybe it's okay to let dandelions grow. Though I know there's things like HOAs and different rules and whatnot, but I think it's just kind of changing our mentality on, what's beautiful in nature and having that perfectly manicured garden that's not always going to facilitate a great pollinator environment. So I think as much as environment and climate control can impact, I think the way that we think about it too, and the way that we support the pollinators is a big impact on the success of the pollinators in our areas.
Last couple questions coming in. A number of people were commenting about the importance of planting diverse set of species. So a number of folks who are listening are pointing out they don't have many pest problems because they do that. They plant a diverse set of plants. So that's really resonating with folks. The HOA question has come up. I don't know if we don't have any information we can share right now in terms of the specific laws. I don't know, Brad or Caitlin, if you have any suggestions if someone lives with an HOA of something simple to maybe try to persuade the HOA to allow to get planted that's good for pollinators, but is also maybe less likely to be seen as a weed. Maybe dandelions probably less so, but any tips on dealing with HOAs? Otherwise, we can move on to the final questions. It's fine if you don't.
I would just say being open with them and talking with them, trying to get them to understand the importance of what their perception of a weed is. And then maybe if the HOA only extends to your front yard, maybe planting things in your backyard or, just trying to work around and within the limitations of your HOA, I think is going to be your best bet.
I agree with Caitlin there. I deal with a lot of HOA questions actually. Where we are in Arvada is surrounded by Candelas and Leiden Rock and 5 parks right there where they have relatively strict planting rules in there. And a lot of the time, what actually makes it different is just the educational piece. Talking and, educating the people that are on your HOA board that like we could plant a lot of beautiful, Colorado native plants in our yard and help with those pollinators and help with, a lot of people, in my opinion, especially with like HOAs, really attached to like the monarch being threatened in there. And so the monarch and the milkweed kind of go hand in hand. And the milkweed is technically a Colorado native species if you get the correct species in there. But talking through how just a little bit of cluster planting can actually make a difference, when, each house around us is removing over 10 plus milkweed plants. And then, really hitting home kind of that emotional effect. You're not being rude, you're not being aggressive with it, but you're just having that conversation. And it's like, every time you have that conversation, you're basically just instilling within that person that it's like, they can actually do something and your community does matter. And especially when it comes to like how you plant. So like planting in your front yard or backyard, it's like, you're making a difference. And, if you are actively trying to make a difference and you're planting 2 or 3 plants this year, you are actually making a really big difference to pollinators, with the bees typically flying less than a 3-mile radius from their home. Every community matters. Downtown Denver has 150 bee species easily. I mean, Jefferson County is 456. So, you matter. How you plant matters. What pesticides you use really matter for pollinators and bees. And you can make a big difference. Your HOA can make a big difference, and just educating them and having that conversation. And I've got a few pamphlets if you're in the Denver area that I can send to whoever, and my email can be attached, or you can reach out to me through our website. But like, HOAs is a tough one. There's set rules and bylaws with that, but starting the conversation is the best way to do it, and keeping your cool and not getting upset and, talking to them and educating them is the best way to at least start the conversation.
Thank you, guys. And then just 2 more questions. Someone was asking about utilizing permaculture practices to help bees offset the effects of climate change. We talked a little bit about that. And then also using neem oil, is that okay for the overall health of your plants and not harming pollinators? If you guys would answer those, and then we'll wrap up.
I think everyone has their own school of thought on neem oil. I see a lot of people like to use it. A lot of our customers use it. We typically try to steer people away from using neem oil just because we just have a different belief in the approach to tackling your bug problems. Neem oil and oils like that tend to coat your plant. It helps maybe in the with the initial issue, but it may not initially, or it may not in the long term help your plant, because it can actually hinder your plant's immune system and your plant's ability to fight off disease and pests. So it's really, every gardener has their own school of thought. I think there are better approaches than neem oil. But that's just kind of what we believe in the effects that we've seen of neem oil on plants. So I think there are better approaches to dealing with pest problems than neem oil. So that's my opinion. But by no means would we look down on anyone or chastise anyone who might be using it. So
I'm in the same kind of thought process there too, is everybody's got their practices that they believe in. Neem oil is slightly toxic in there. The thing that I typically talk about is like your time of day that you're applying pesticides is really important. Bees are out foraging during the day. So, what time of day you're actually treating your garden is really important to keep in mind in there. So that's the only thing I'm going to kind of add to that. I think Caitlin hit it on the head. What was the other question?
Someone was just asking about permaculture, if that would be helpful for overall not using pesticides and helping the effects of climate change.
Yeah, I'm totally game for permaculture and its practices to help bee and pollinator species. There's a lot of different types of gardening that is super helpful in their own way. And I always just remind people that it's like gardening's fun. Gardening's, whatever you want to make of it. And it's like finding how best you're going to be able to go out and enjoy your garden and really love it and want to be out there, getting dirt underneath your fingernails and being out there planting your companion plants and really just understanding that like our garden is just a part of our environment and it is a part of something much bigger than just the cucumbers that we're pickling this year. It's more than just the spaghetti sauce that we're making from our tomatoes or the kohlrabi slices we're eating in there. Just have fun with your garden and, pay a little more attention this year to like how you're in part of your environment and how your general can help out with pollinators and, maybe pick one thing that is important to you to like help out with pollinators and make that happen this year. Make it realistic in there. We can't change the world in one day and it's going to be hard to, change it just from like one yard. So just keep talking to people about it. Keep, pushing permaculture if that's your thing. Go for it. I love it. So there's no wrong way to approach helping pollinators. If you have the right mindset in there, absolutely, it'll help.
Thank you guys so much. That was great. Just wanted to remind everyone, Brad is with Finding Nectar, and Caitlin, thank you from Soko Organics. And we'll have their information as well. Thank you to everyone for all your questions. That was so great. And I just wanted to say Environment Colorado also has some pollinator garden kits for sale on our website. There's some wildflower seeds, a bee-friendly garden sign that you can put up in your garden. So I'm going to put the link to that in the Zoom chat, so you can check that out as well. And then again, this is being recorded, so we'll put this up on our website. We will email everyone a link after. And a huge thank you to our panelists again. That was so amazing. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
And
thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was great.